Good evening. Welcome to the Monday edition of Spurs Diehards TTID, Tottenham Till I Die. A special edition tonight. We're not doing the usual talk about a game. Tonight I have with me Kieran Maguire, known to Alan Brazil as Kev, but to everybody else as Kieran. Football finance expert, author of The Price of Football, lecturer on football finance at Liverpool University, and apparently only with a talent for self-publicity, according to Rick Parry, who's probably only got a talent for self-publicity. Welcome, Kieran. Welcome to our show.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, gentlemen. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. Before we get into the nitty-gritty about football finance and football clubs and what have you, I want to talk a little bit about your own background because I suppose like a lot of people that start off with their academic careers, they have no real idea what they're going to do. But you were born in London in 1962 and went to college in Brighton, and you are a Brighton supporter. I think you were born around the Lewisham area. Is that right?
I was born in Elephant and Castle, but by rights I should be a Millwall fan.
Yeah.
But I was born in '62. My old man wasn't interested in football. A couple of his brothers did. And they wanted to take me to the old Den. But my Uncle Terry ran with their crew, shall we say. And my mum wouldn't let me go with him because she thought he'd lead me astray. Yeah, I'd been looked after because you know what it was like. For all of the things which were a bit wrong in those days, they always made sure that the kids were fairly safe. And then my old man got a job in Brighton, so I went to school there, and local club, so you go and support them.
Yeah, you graduated in economics from Manchester University, and you became an accountant. Was that something you intended, or was it? I don't know what to do. Let's go into accounts.
It was because I was always good with numbers, and in those days, remember, we didn't have computers. So if you're good with numbers, I was under pressure to sort of do something like that. But I mean, I went to Manchester. I had a couple. I could have gone to some perhaps slightly more prestigious universities, but my life's always been about music and football. So the Manchester music scene was fantastic, late 70s, early 80s. So that was a big attraction to me. I had 3 brilliant years there. And I came back home. I didn't have a job, graduated in 83. And I ended up managing a sex shop in Brighton. Which you weren't expecting that. Yeah, it's not on my Wikipedia page. And because one of my mates, he did run it. He was sort of the manager, and he was going off to a kibbutz for the summer to Israel. So I thought. So he said, "Would I keep an eye on it?" And I did. But I couldn't tell my mum and dad. Their darling little son just gone to university and was end up selling dildos for a living. Just didn't. So I managed to get a job with a firm of accountants, and I had to take a 50% pay cut, which wasn't good, and that was at Grant Thornton in sort of Worthing. But I still wanted to go back to Manchester, so I got a transfer, and I was dead lucky because the guy that was in charge of Grant Thornton in Manchester, his ambition was to win their national cricket competition. So I went up for this transfer. And he looked at me and he says, it says on your CV that you've been with Sussex under-19s in cricket. And I was going, oh, yes, sir. Expecting him to be asking me loads of technical questions. He says, so what do you do? He says, well, I'm a left arm, reasonably swift opening bowler. And he says, right, you're starting in 2 weeks. And I ran the cricket team for Grant Thornton. I was an absolutely crap accountant.
Okay.
But I was running the cricket team, and we won the national competition, and we won the Manchester competition twice, and I managed to qualify as a chartered accountant, managed to schlep my way through the exams.
in between going to the Stone Roses or Joy Division or Oasis gigs?
Yeah. I mean, it was just magnificent. Manchester music's still magnificent, and that's that. If I had to give up one of football or music, I'd give up football.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
I'm not going to talk about too much about music. I'm a huge music man myself, but I wouldn't want to give. I wouldn't want to give either up.
No, I wouldn't. No, I'm with you entirely.
Yeah, that fills most of my waking hours, football and music. But
yes,
more of a soul man, me. But let's move on. There's some comments in the chat, guys. I won't put any questions up. Excuse me, at the moment. It might be as we go through. This will be questions that will be relevant as we go through. But I'll keep Kieran talking or Kevin talking at the moment. From training as an accountant at Grant Thornton, you went into academic life.
Yeah. My son's got Asperger's, so when he was sort of diagnosed, sort of being in the world of finance and accounting, it's quite demanding, and you have to reprioritize things. So, academia, there's a bit of flexibility. You've got the holidays, which time with school holidays, things like that. And I'd always wanted to teach. I'd never wanted to be an accountant, and I was inspired when I was a kid, and I'm a ragged-assed kid. I've got I'm from a family of bricklayers and farmers back in Ireland. So, for me to get to university, because I had good teachers, and I'm a huge believer in education. So I wanted to go back and put something back. So I've been teaching now since 1989. So it's absolutely great. I mean, I don't know anybody who probably loves their job as much as I do in terms of money. To see light bulbs go on in the heads of people. To see people, when they come, they graduated and they come back a few years later and they're telling you about what they've done, and if you can help them to achieve their goals, I think that's very rewarding. Although the pay's crap.
Well, yeah, you probably have earned more at Grant Thornton. But then, okay, you become an academic. You're teaching numbers, and I know you have some comments on your LinkedIn page and stuff like that about taking the fear out of numbers. If you can count 2 and 2, you can understand this. I mean, I'll be someone as a fear of numbers. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I might have become an economist if, ironically, if I'd have been better at numbers, but my numbers weren't good enough to get into the best schools to study economics. So I did other things, but you became a lecturer in football finance, I think, at Liverpool University in 2013. Is that right? Yeah. I mean, all of my teaching life's been in Manchester and Liverpool, and they are two huge football cities. So when I first started teaching, in order to get young people, and by young people I mean people in the ages of 18 to 21 or postgrads, normally sort of 20s and so on, to get them engaged with something is really difficult. Ultimately, I'm teaching accounting. It's a pretty tedious subject. So I quickly learned that instead of talking about the stuff I was supposed to teach, which was about Vodafone and Marks and Spencers and Walmart and so on, I used football clubs as examples. So if I go into a class today, so I'm teaching tomorrow, and one of the questions we've got planning tomorrow, we're looking at how do we account for football players and why can't some clubs sign anybody. So I'm going to show them part of Manchester United accounts, which shows that Manchester United owe other clubs £463 million in unpaid instalments on transfers. And all of a sudden, you've got the class engaged. You've got, well, how do they get away with that? Is this why they can't spend money? And you can talk them traditional financial methods through the lens of a football club. So I was doing that in Manchester, and it wasn't a football finance course. And then, life's full of sliding doors moments. I was saying earlier that the money in teaching is not good, which is fine by me. I don't want flash things in life. If I've got a t-shirt and jeans on, that's all I ever need. But I moonlight.
I work for others. So I moonlight on Wall Street and I moonlight in Canary Wharf. And it is, in fact, almost coming up to the anniversary. 20 years ago, I was teaching in a particular bank. I go out at lunchtime to get a bit of fresh air, come back, and there's sort of 2 or 3 sort of, hefty looking blokes on the door. I thought, blimey, what's going on here? I go into the people that I'm sort of doing a bit of training with. I say, what's the score? And they say, well, the New York market's about to open. And one of our clients, the Glazer family, is about to announce a leveraged buyout of Manchester United. And we're a bit concerned that a bunch of Cockney Reds are going to come in and try to put the windows out and try to storm the building because they probably don't like it. And so we talk about the deal, and that was fine, all sort of the standard stuff. And I didn't really think that much about it. I get on the train going back to Manchester. My boss phones up and says, BBC have been in contact. They want an academic to explain the Manchester United takeover. So the following morning, I go in and it's I'm on the BBC sofa, for breakfast. I'm going, blimey, I'm waving to my mum, I'm waving to my kids and all this type of stuff. And I didn't make a complete arse of myself because I'm not super smart. I think I'm quite good at explaining things in simple language, which for a breakfast TV audience probably work quite well. Some of the people I work with, my academic colleagues, they are 10 times more clever than I am, but they talk in a language of somebody who's 10 times smarter.
You can take the boy out of the elephant and castle, but you can't take the elephant and castle out of the boy.
That's right. We're all wheeler dealers, aren't we? And we're all sort of slightly dodgy, and that is my background. And then the next time a football finance story came in, because I'd been okay the first time, you go on to somebody's list of contacts, and now I do probably around about 800 media slots a year. It is non-stop. On Friday, last Friday, I started off in Liverpool. Then I went across to Boundary Park in Oldham, and I did some work there, and that was sort of a presentation to people interested in football finance on a panel. Mike Keegan from the Mail, he was hosting it, and then I had to leg it at 1:00 because Brighton. I'm a Brighton fan. Brighton are playing Chelsea, so I'd said to my missus, it's Valentine's night, of course. So first of all, I've been up north all week, so I wasn't in the good books. I said to her, look, I reckon I'll get down to Brighton for around about 6. We can grab a bite to eat. Leo, at least spend a sort of a semi-romantic hour together, and then we go and watch the football. And to be fair, my wife has to put up with an awful lot because I work stupid hours, and she tolerates this, and she's got a season ticket next to me because otherwise she wouldn't see me at all. And the Manchester City Associated Party transactions case verdict was announced at 5:30. So I get to the restaurant and I've got journalists phoning out every 5 minutes. Can I explain this, that, and the other? So I'm doing that, and the missus, what it's like, arms folded. This is Valentine's night, is it? What do you think you are? And then we go to the match. And to be fair, my wife is absolutely wonderful. She has to put up with an awful lot. And Brighton did all right. I'm sure as Spurs fans, you weren't too upset that we turned Chelsea over. And my missus, she's a retired head teacher, and she's bellowing, "Mark Cucurella, you know what you are." I don't think I've ever loved her more. This woman, she's just so fantastic. How could she be? Because we hate Cucurella. We hate Cucurella more than any other player in the country, and I was just so proud of her.
There'll be no Spurs supporters watching this either live or on catch up that will be upset that you turned over Chelsea 3-0 on Friday night. I didn't see it on music quiz night on Friday, which we won, by the way. But let me take you on, because I am going to talk about Manchester City, and obviously people watching are going to want to know what your views are on Spurs, where we are as a club, and where we might get to in the future. But There was a very famous book about Spurs called The Glory Game, written by the distinguished
Hunter Davis.
novelist,
Yeah.
Hunter Davis. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
an absolutely magnificent read about Tottenham in the 71-72 season. But he talks about directors in those days being the local butcher, baker and candlestick maker. You need 50 quid to paint the stand. The directors would stick in 50 quid. You needed 5,000 to buy the best striker. They'd bung in a 5,000 quid. And the game has changed out of, I mean, I'm 65, you're 62, Adrian's just turned 70. We come from a different era. And the question I've got before we get on to some of the real nitty-gritty, Kieran, is how did football become so distorted? That's a big question, but suddenly the game bears no relationship to the game we were watching 40 years ago.
Well, it does, because I think all three of us, we're old enough to remember Derby County, Nottingham Forest, Everton, Blackburn Rovers, Leeds United, all winning the old top division. We remember that period when Liverpool were dominant. Sure. I think another team in North London may have won it, but I can't remember. But it was a merry-go-round, and it was the best team with the best coach for that particular season that did well. And you started off in August, and I suspect all of us, we used to get shoot, and we'd have our little tabs, and we'd put them in and move the table around each week. And if Ipswich Town finished as runners-up, it's because they were the second best team in the country, and nobody thought it was strange, because footballers, were they well paid by working class standards? Yes, they were. But the average salary for a player in the Premier League is, by my calculations, probably 70 to 75k a week. And in those days, it would have been, in the 70s, probably it was 200 quid a week. So I think the gap between footballers as professionals and sort of the working class fan bases that used to populate football exclusively has grown. The money coming into the game has spectacularly grown because the Premier League has done some things which were really smart. When the Premier League was set up in 1992, they went to Australia, they went to Hong Kong, they went to Nigeria, they went to Norway, and they said, look, we're English football. We've been through a rough period. We've just been kicked out of London for 5 years, so kicked out of Europe for 5 years. Crowds were, you didn't see full stadiums, did you, in those days? They were. I can remember Manchester United one season having the highest attendances in England with 38,000. And football was going through some tough times. And to be fair to the Premier League, they went to all these different countries. We said, we've now got a football product, and we're going to give it to you for nothing. We're just trying to build up an audience. We're just going to try to build up interest. And again, we're old enough to remember the first satellite boxes and watching football. In those days, I think you get one match a week, sometimes 2 matches a week, live on Sky and BSB. And we all thought that was absolutely great. And then what the broadcasters found was that the one thing that stopped people cancelling their subscriptions was live football. And everything changed, because when they went back to all of those different broadcasters in those different countries who 5 years previously had said, 5 years football, okay, it will fill a slot, it'll give us something to broadcast on the weekend. Everybody in Thailand had fallen in love with football. And it was, and it was the clubs who were successful, or the clubs that had been successful, that built up the biggest audiences. So Sir Alex Ferguson's sort of reign at Manchester United started in those early to mid 90s period, which coincided with the launch of satellite television. Liverpool had been successful in the 80s, so therefore there'd been a lot of interest in Liverpool. That's why those two clubs today are the most successful brands in football. And then we've seen other clubs come along as well, including Spurs, London club, lots of it. I teach in Cyprus, I teach in other places. I know Spurs have got a huge fan base in Cyprus, huge fan base in Australia. You know this far better than I do. And all of a sudden, Spurs fans were able to go and see their club play. And that meant that the broadcasters were keen, the sponsors were keen, and football has grown. If you compare the money coming into football from that very first season in the Premier League, consumer prices have increased by 140% since 1992. Premier League revenues have increased by 2,900%. They've grown 20 times faster than what we're paying. So all of that money coming into the game, and also wages have gone up by 3,800%. So footballers became completely different. They became disconnected to a certain extent from people in the street, and we now have a competition which is dictated to by money to a far greater extent, because there are 2 or 3 clubs that can outbid everybody else in terms of wages. Football's a talent game, and talent follows the money, and there's nothing wrong with talent following the money. If somebody was going to give me £500,000 to teach, I go and work, I go and teach there. So I don't have an issue with it, and that's where we are today.
I mean, the next question I've got, and you probably answered it, is what's the attraction of football for investors? And although there's revenues, you're saying that the costs, for example, the revenues might go up 2,000%. If the wages are going up 3,000%, you say, oh, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. It's going to cost me more to run the club than I'm going to get any revenues. So what's the attraction?
I guess to a certain extent, it's a bit like owning a house. You've got your purchase price. Then if you can improve, it's a bit like having Dion Dublin around. If you can improve your house for a period of time, you can sell it at a far higher price. Now it's going to cost you money in that interim period, and that's what we see with football. Of the 51 clubs who have been in the Premier League since its inception in 1992, I think only, by my calculations, only 14 have made a profit. So that means 37 have lost money. We have this really glib saying in the world of finance: revenue is vanity. I.e., people like to be able to say, profit is sanity, but there is no sanity in football, and the reason for that is that there are some owners of football clubs for whom making money is an irrelevance. So if you take a look at Roman Abramovich, it cost him £900,000 a week for 19 years to run Chelsea. Those were the losses the club incurred during that period. But it did mean that everybody knew who Roman Abramovich is. And that's quite important if you're a Russian oligarch, because, as we know, Russian oligarchs have an unfortunate habit of drowning in paddling pools and falling out of windows and being in planes which get mysteriously attacked by aliens and disappearing. So if you've got a high profile, you've got a presence, and it makes you slightly more difficult to disappear. So he, to a certain extent, Chelsea Football Club was an insurance policy for him. Sheikh Mansour came into Manchester City. Nobody had ever heard of Abu Dhabi. So what better way to get people to know about your country and your brand? And if you're wanting Abu Dhabi to come Dubai Mark II, which he does, wants it to be a tourist hub, then increasing your profile through football. So it's not sports washing, it's sports marketing. It's using football clubs as marketing, either yourself as an individual, as we've seen in the case of Abramovich, or your country in the case of Sheikh Mansour. So you've got some owners who don't care whether they make money or lose money. You've got some owners, say Brighton, we've got an owner, Tony Bloom. He's put 500 million quid into the club. Why? Because what else is he going to do with it? You can only drive one car at one time. He might have he might own a few properties around and about, but even so, he's been very successful. He supports the club. He puts money in, and when he took over, the club was sort of effectively in League One. He said, "I'm going to try to get you to the Premier League," and he's done it. So he's living the dream, but that means it costs money. The fact that he's losing money, well, he's a gambler. He owns racehorses. If you own a racehorse, it's going to lose you money. You look at the money that Jim Ratcliffe has lost in yachting, he's lost in cycling. Why not go and lose it in football as well?
There's something actually, and a question you've inspired. I often think, it's very much a personal view, that when Alan Sugar was chairman of Tottenham in 1992, was manufacturing satellite dishes for B Sky B and what have you, that he never joined the dots in understanding that if he was selling all these satellite dishes, there was bound to be money in football, and he didn't invest in Tottenham at a time when Tottenham could have been up there with the very biggest clubs. And I know if people blame Daniel Levy, and we'll talk about Daniel Levy, but I think Alan Sugar was really culpable in failing to understand his own business model and where it might lead him in terms of football.
I think he was so focused on football making money for Amstrad that football making money via Spurs was of secondary interest. I think it's fairly well known that there was a TV deal on the table with another broadcaster, and the Premier League were about to sign off on it, and Alan Sugar got on the phone to Sky, by all accounts, this is an allegation, phoned up Sky and says, look, you need to put in a better bid, and they did. Now, it was in his interest for that to be the case, and from a business point of view, it was a really smart decision. And I know the broadcasters at ITV quite well, and they were convinced that the Premier League were going to sign up with them, but instead they went down the satellite route instead. Well, in order to be able to watch football on satellite, you needed a dish. Who's making the dishes? Step forward, Alan Sugar. So there was an element of self-interest for it. But did Spurs miss a trick? I think you could argue that was the case. Does Alan Sugar's very successful across a variety of industries, does that automatically mean that you're going to be successful in football? I would say no, because for all of my obsession with football finance, I do know the finances of Vodafone. I do know the finances of Marks and Spencers and so on, and they are completely different in terms of the way that they run, in terms of the key performance indicators. I know we're coming on to talk about Daniel Levy a bit later on. Spurs are the most profitable football club in the history of Premier League football. Does Daniel Levy ever get any plaudits for that? Do fans ever take any pride in the fact that it's the financially most robust, most sustainable, most profitable club? Well, it's not, because you didn't fall in love with Spurs. I don't know when you first we probably went along the same. You go along that first match. You're 7 or 8 years old. You're going along with your mum, your dad, your uncle, your gran, whoever it's going to be, or one of your mates at school. His dad's going to take you and him along, and you sign that invisible contract because on that day you fall in love with Spurs, and that invisible contract says you are going to follow Spurs for the rest of your life, through thick and thin. An awful lot of thin, because that's for the majority. Majority of clubs are not successful because you can only have four champions in English football in any 1 year. And we do have clubs which have dynasties. So there's going to be a lot of misery, and I honestly think it's the misery which binds us together as fans. That joint suffering, which is a horrible feeling, but it does mean a fan knows what you mean. I went to Forest 2 weeks ago. Brighton got thumped 7-0, but you still stayed. You still stayed to 90 minutes because that's what you do as an away fan, unless you're Chelsea. But to be fair to the Chelsea fans, the away end was probably 3/4 empty with 10 minutes to go on Friday. But I thought actually perhaps those Chelsea fans had decided to go home to their loved ones to spend a romantic last part of the evening with them, and that's why they left the ground early.
Love it. I do absolutely love it. But football's tried to regulate itself, and I think we're going to get into some nitty-gritty now. We've had financial fair play, we've had profit and sustainability. What I wrote down there was different acronyms, same result. for whatever reason, the clubs and the big clubs, the rich clubs, seem to always be one step ahead. So, what's going on in that respect?
Well, I think you've got to first of all determine. We had this thing called financial fair play. First of all, we have to determine what the word fair means. Now, fairness means different things to different people. Some people would say that fairness means that if a club generates more money than other clubs, it should be allowed to spend more money than other clubs. I understand that where that comes from. Fans of what I would refer to as challenger clubs, and I would say that Spurs are part of the Big Six, but they're not part of the Big Six, if you know what I mean. Yeah, they've always been slightly in a little hinterland by themselves. But if a new Spurs owner comes in, and I think we all know that there is at present interest in the ENIC shareholding, and you probably know this far better than I do. I've been told where that interest is from. How accurate that is, we always take it with a pinch of salt. But let's say that those new owners come in, that makes Spurs far more of a challenger club, because Spurs wage bill, it's averaging 100 grand a week. I'd take that. I think we'd all take that. But by Premier League standards, Manchester City's average is 198 grand a week. Manchester United's is 160. Chelsea's 160. So it's still behind some of those other clubs that you want to compete with. If the owners want to put in more money, should they be allowed to? And the same applies to Aston Villa, because they've got billionaire owners. The same applies to Newcastle United. We know that they've been acquired by Saudi Arabia PIF. The same arises in terms of Nottingham Forest. They've got a billionaire owner who's desperate for them to get into the Champions League and to win the Premier League and so on. And PSR prevents those owners from coming in and spending more money. Not necessarily spending more money than the other clubs, but spending as much money as the other clubs. And if you take a look at the UEFA handbook, and I would not recommend this to anyone. I genuinely, I've got no life, no friends, no personality. I'm a chartered accountant. I'm teetotal. I'm colourblind. I'm as dull can be. So I just spend my time looking at these publications. It says financial fair play is not there to create a level playing field. And I think that's a real indictment of the rules. But the rules effectively prevent the challenger clubs from turning themselves into the next Chelsea, the next Manchester City, and so on. Because 6 into 4 doesn't go when it comes to Champions League places. If you've got 2 or 3, 8 into 4 doesn't go either. But it doesn't go, and it's worse. And that's what the rules are there to ensure. It doesn't encourage profitability, because it allows clubs to lose £105 million every 3 years. And it doesn't encourage sustainability, because under the rules, you've got clubs such as Chelsea who can sell the women's team to themselves and book a profit, can sell hotels to themselves and book a profit, can sell car parks to themselves and book a profit. Well, if I think about my house, if I say I'm trying to live a sustainable lifestyle, and effectively every couple of years I'm moving from my house to a house with one fewer bedroom, and then a couple of years later to i.e. all my property assets go down, that's probably not very sustainable lifestyle.
Okay. With PSR, then, what the way you've described it, is that why Newcastle haven't seemed to have made the kind of massive investment that we saw, particularly from Mansour when he took over Manchester City?
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct in that observation. The aim is to prevent another Manchester City from being created. So by allowing, let's take a look at the current UEFA rules. The current UEFA rules say that you can spend 70% of your revenue on wages. It's more complicated than that, but that's sort of broadly it. Manchester City generates £700 million in revenue. 70% of 700 is £490 million. Newcastle United generate 300 million. 70% of 300 is 210. So that means at the start of the season, Manchester City have got a £280 million advantage over Newcastle United in terms of player wages and transfer fees. That's a pretty damn big advantage, isn't it? So how can Newcastle United sign the players and keep the players, which will allow them to challenge Manchester City?
Adrian, are you looking to come in on that? Or?
Yeah, well, Kieran, my question would be, because that's a big revenue stream from Manchester City, 700 million. How do they generate? Do you know how they're generating 700 million? Because they're not a big enough club. They can't fill the stadium for even Champions League games.
Okay, well, because I've got no life, no personality, and all the above bollocks, I can answer that. 50% of Manchester City's revenue comes from commercial and sponsorship deals. So they got a very lucrative deal with Puma. They got a very lucrative deal with Etihad Airways. They've got various other commercial partners as well. Their commercial income is by far the highest of any club in the Premier League. And you are right to say that they generate less match day revenue. Manchester United, I think last season generated 136 million. I think City generated probably about 60. So they do have a disadvantage. Now, I live in Manchester. Part of that disadvantage is that, to be fair to Manchester City, they haven't tried to rinse the fans. They've not charged sky high prices. Manchester United, as you're probably aware, were recently charging kids £66 to go in terms of match day tickets. They're charging seniors £66 for match day tickets for the rest of this season, and that seems as if they are targeting a certain demographic, and that certain type of demographic. I lived in Manchester for 40 years of my life. Isn't from around where Old Trafford is, because I'm sure you've been to Old Trafford as away fans. It's not the wealthy part of the city. So Manchester City, first of all, they generate an awful lot of money from TV because they're in the Champions League. They won the Premier League, so they got 170 million in Premier League TV money. They'll have got the thick end of another 100 million in terms of UEFA money, and the reason for that is I think they got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League last season. But the way that the UEFA divvy up the money in the Champions League is that it's based on partially on your performance in the last 5 years. Well, you can like City or dislike City, but they got to the final in 21. They won it in 23. Quarterfinals last year. I think they have been successful in that competition, and that drives additional revenue to them. Then you've got the sponsorship income, which is the biggest driver of their overall revenue, and I know people will question that because as a brand, I don't think Manchester City are as global as, I would say, the biggest brand in the country football-wise is Manchester United, probably followed by Liverpool. Then, in terms of where clubs are today, I'd probably say one of the London clubs and Manchester City are probably in knocking around that third position because of the success they've had over the last decade or so.
Okay, I want to talk about Manchester City because 115 charges. I don't want to go through them one by one because we'll be here all night, and I know people will be watching, wanting to talk about how what we've talked about up to now is going to impact on Tottenham, and you've talked about the turnover, talked about the wages, which I'm going to bring you on to. But where do you see this going with Manchester City? I mean, I'm sure you've got no inside track, but just the way they've taken on, where they went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. There's the legal challenge, which is, I know it's slightly different to these, but they've just won as well. But it seems to me that we'll just put the Lord David Panicks, their lead lawyer, who, whatever you do, we will put the best lawyers in the country on you, and we'll take you out, whatever you try and do.
Yeah, I think you can actually narrow the Manchester City's 115 charges down to 3. The first charge, because they're saying that they took place in over a 9-10 year period, so many of them are sort of 1 year to next. The first accusation is that Manchester City received money from the owner, which they pretended to be sponsorship income. And the reason why that's an issue is that sponsorship money goes into your PSR calculations and money from the owner doesn't. So that's been one of the accusations. In order for that to be proven before the commission, you've got to have evidence that Manchester City have lied to UEFA. Manchester City have lied in terms of their depositions, or in the opinion of the commission, they've lied. Also, that Etihad Airways, which is a listed company, so this would be, corporate fraud, has lied in terms of its sponsorship. And thirdly, I think you've got to say that Manchester City's auditors have either been asleep at the wheel, complicit in all of this, or completely incompetent. And they're a big firm of auditors, so they will not have been complicit in this, in my view. As an accountant, I know how accountants push the boundaries, but I don't think they would go that far. So that's the first thing. I think it's, if proven, I think that will be seismic. The second accusation is that members of staff at Manchester City, so let's take Roberto Mancini, who was the coach for a couple of years there. The accusation is that he was being paid £2 million a year to be the coach of Manchester City, and was also receiving £2 million a year to coach a football team in Abu Dhabi, i.e. he was effectively being paid off book. This means if the money's not going through Manchester City's accounts, it reduces their costs, which reduces their PSR losses. I think that's where Manchester City are potentially the weakest, because the auditors wouldn't pick it up because it's a private contract between Mancini and the Abu Dhabi entity. At the same time, could he claim it was partly to do with image rights? Again, if a college in Manchester, if a college in Abu Dhabi wants to pay me £2 million a year for 4 days teaching, where do I sign? I'll fly myself over if I have to, for that. So have they actually done anything wrong? I think that's for the commission to decide. I think the third charge is that Manchester City have not cooperated with the Premier League during the investigation. And it has to be remembered that this is the charges that Manchester City were found guilty of by CAS. And on the back of that, they think they had to go and pay a €10 million fine. So Manchester City's defence will be that the Premier League have obtained evidence from hacked emails, and under those circumstances, why should they cooperate? If somebody hacked my email system and then started asking me questions about it, I'd tell them to do one. I wouldn't cooperate with them. So I think that's the position where they're probably most likely to be found guilty. But have they gained any sporting advantage from that? I would argue not. So, in terms of the first two sets of charges, if that gave them a financial benefit from the sponsorship and the off-book wages, then I think there is a very case for saying that's a sporting advantage, and therefore it needs a sporting sanction in the same way that we've seen in the cases of Everton and Nottingham Forest. In the non-cooperation, I think a fine would be the appropriate penalty.
And Rangers to some extent as well with their EBTs. I don't know if that's one you've followed, and maybe people watching won't be that interested in Rangers, but they had employee benefits trusts for certain players, but the disciplinary panel said no sporting advantage. Odd finding. Anyway, I'll move you on from there. Let's talk about Tottenham. Oh no, sorry. One more question on Man City. No sporting. So are you thinking it's likely to be a fine rather than relegation or bans from cups? Or
no, I think if found guilty of the first two items, and as a result of that, they would have breached PSR, then it has to be a points deduction, because the rulings in the cases of both Nottingham Forest and Everton resulted in points deductions because they were in breach of PSR as a result of some of the transactions they've undertaken. And it also has to be remembered that both Nottingham Forest and Everton, their breaches covered a relatively small period of time. The accusations against Manchester City cover the period 2009 to 2018. It's also fraud. Let's be honest. That's what they're being accused of. So in order to be seen to be punishing the club, and B, to be setting up a deterrent for any other clubs that are thinking of doing similar, not only does it have to be a points deduction, it has to be a points deduction of such magnitude that it reflects the severity of the guilt, if found guilty. Now, I've looked at the commission verdicts for both Everton and Nottingham Forest because I've got nothing better to do with my life. And in both cases, it said this is a minor breach of the rules. What Manchester City is being accused of is a major breach of the rules over a sustained period of time. And that surely has to be reflected, if found guilty, in the extent of the sanctions against them.
Adrian, because I want to go on to Spurs after this.
Just one question on that. I mean, we've recently heard that they have won their case for the associated partnership transactions. So that's separate to these 115 charges. We're also led to believe, it's widely reported, that the release of the results of the commission about these 150 charges is imminent. The cynic in me, and probably in a lot of fans, is, the Premier League got the result and we're waiting for the result of the associated partnership transactions court case. The fear in me is that now Man City would have the right to sue the Premier League over the associated partnership transactions, and whether that lot of the Premier League, who couldn't run a bath, in my opinion, try and do some deal with Man City. That's the fear.
I don't think it's necessarily just Manchester City who could potentially be seeking compensation for the APT rules, which the original set of rules, which were introduced 3 weeks after the takeover of Newcastle United Football Club by PIF. But according to the Premier League, that's just an amazing coincidence. So it could be that Newcastle United, it could be that Aston Villa, it could be that other clubs could also potentially sue the Premier League for preventing them from signing off on lucrative hospitality stroke sponsorship deals, as well as Manchester City. And it could result in a very, very expensive few months. And it's already, and the Premier League wage bill has been horrendous in the past couple of years. I have not heard a dicky bird in terms of the verdict for the 115 charges. It is completely independent. The Premier League will hear this at the same time as Manchester City on this, and then both parties will be given the opportunity to put together their press releases in terms of this. I honestly think that the two issues, they've been held by separate commissions. They are watertight in terms of information coming out. I know a few people in the world of law. I know quite a few journalists and so on. Nobody is getting any sign of white smoke coming out of Premier League towers or the Commission towers relating to the verdict, either the date and certainly not the outcome.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not surprised. Just for people watching as well as you, Kieran, I've chaired disciplinary panels in Scotland. I don't anymore, but I did since their inception. And you just go into purdah with it. I mean, there's just no way you're talking to journalists or anybody else about what's going on. Let's talk about Tottenham, because we don't want to be here all night. I know you've got to get back north as well. Tottenham Hotspur, a success story and a failure all in one. Turnover 2019-20, 446 million. That was the launch of the new stadium. Obviously a drop in 2021 with COVID, but by 21-22 up to 440 million. And then 2022-23, the last set of accounts that we've got at the moment, turnover for the first time over £500 million, which should enable Tottenham to compete. wages to turnover ratio was something we talked about earlier. 46%, the lowest in the league, and with some of the players that have gone out compared to some of the kids that have come in, that's probably going to fall. Whereas Villa, Everton, and Forest and Leicester, and I mean, I think 3 of them have fallen foul of the rules. They're running between 90 and 110%. As a businessman, Daniel Levy would say, and as an accountant, I suspect you would agree that 46% is sustainable, 90 to 110% isn't.
I'd agree. I'd agree totally with that. Spurs have season after season after season spent the lowest proportion of the money coming into the club. And where does the club generate money from? Commercial broadcasts and matchday has spent the lowest proportion of that in wages in the Premier League. And that certainly has been the case over the 30 years of existence of the Premier League. So that has been, if you are viewing Spurs as a business, and I think this is where sort of lines start to become blurred. What is the purpose of Spurs? Now, the purpose of Spurs to you guys is to see a successful team that's competing for trophies, giving you some glory nights, giving you some misery as well, because we're all old enough to realise that you can't win every match, and it actually be a bit boring if you did. It's a nice problem to have, but you look at football up in Scotland. How? Sorry.
That rings a bell.
Yeah. So that's I will have to leave in a few minutes. I've got to phone a former footballer. Okay. So that's the position as far as Spurs are concerned. As a business, they are the most profitable in Premier League history. Does that make them competitive? Well, in terms of wages, their wage bill is £100 million less than that of Liverpool, Manchester United, certainly more 150 million less than City, and so on. And talent will go to who pays the best wages. It happens in every other industry, including football.
So, are we a bunch of ungrateful, or do we need to have some realism here? Because the Spurs for Change, you may have picked up yesterday, there was I won't call it a big protest, but there was certainly a larger protest than we've seen so far, and the chance of Levy out have reverberated around the ground, particularly when we've lost. But Spurs for Change, we have the best facilities, stadium, training ground, and the highest prices charged anywhere in football, and yet we have old Mother Hubbard for a training ground. So where do you see us, before I go on to what the future might hold? Where do you see supporters like me and Adrian and the people in the chat who are watching, who are going to say, all I want to see is a trophy? There's people that watch our shows that have never actually seen Spurs win anything. Adrian and I have been to Wembley, seen us win cups, seen us win European trophies. One of the greatest nights was 1984 when we beat Anderlecht. You can't buy that kind of memory. And there's kids that watch Spurs now that haven't seen anything like what we've seen.
If I was in your position, I think if I was having to pay the prices that you have paid, if I've had to spend 20 months getting across to Wembley, and Wembley's a dreadful place to watch football, unless it is I think as a one-off cup match, fine. 19, 20 odd times a season, I would hate it. Yeah, we all know the shortcomings of Wembley as a stadium. Then I would be very frustrated. And you've gone through all of the growing pains in terms of moving to the new stadium. You are being charged. If you go to a Michelin restaurant, you expect to pay Michelin prices. You're being charged Michelin prices, and you're not being given a Michelin star product. I think that's how I would feel. And I guess I would feel, and I speak to West Ham fans as well, they feel cheated because part of that contract when they moved to the London Stadium, and I used to go and love going to Upton Park, even proper stadium.
Yeah.
You knew as Spurs fans, it was going to be, it's going to be lively. It's going to be, there's going to be an awful lot of noise there, and you go there now, and it's a Vicar's tea party. And there's no atmosphere beforehand, and I'm not, I'm not going to romanticize the wrong things that were in football in the 70s and 80s. We've all been there. I'm glad there are elements of football which no longer exist. But West Ham used to be intimidating for players because of the noise, because of the ferocity. That's gone, and they said, right, we're prepared to give up that, provided we started to see success. And okay, they have won now a European trophy, and they've been into European on a couple of occasions, but I think they feel broadly disappointed. I would feel in a similar manner if I was a Spurs fan, in the sense that if you're going to charge me top table prices, why are you not delivering a top table product? Is it the budget? I think Spurs have a competitive budget, but it's still the 5th highest, or sometimes the 6th highest. So does that mean that your natural position is bottom end of the top 6? The numbers would suggest that. Clearly this season you're having a stinker of a season, but you could still you could still win a trophy. And with that, and I think you've got, if you avoid Manchester United, I think you are probably the favourites in the Europa competition. So there is still the chance to make progress and to win things, but equally I can understand the frustration. Some of the results have been underperforming compared to your budget this season. In previous seasons, I don't think Spurs have necessarily underperformed. I think it's just they've just been frustrated that they've not managed to get a trophy over the line.
Adrian, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just one last question from me. The 70% that to bring us in line with Europe of spending of revenue streams, is that 70%? Would that be off that 549 million in total, or would it be 70% excluding non-related football expenditure? But I mean, infrastructure expenditure, training ground, all that. You can spend as much as you like on, as far as I know, right? Is that just what you take off that figure is the wage bill and agents' fees, outstanding transfer fees and stuff like that, and then the figure left is 70% off of that?
Yeah. So you take your total income of 550, you divide it by 70%. So that's going to be what, 300, but just around about 400 mil. And Spurs' wages last season were 251. You'd ignore what's spent on infrastructure. You've got 109 million on amortization, so that goes on. Then you take away your player sale profits. Spurs, I mean, that's one area where I think Spurs have underperformed. Again, I know.
And they've brought more players in now, so that's added to that sums that's got to be amortised to restrict your spending again. I mean, since the stadium opened in 2019, I believe, before Ange came in, depending on which reports you would believe, we spent 600 to 685 million on players, poor recruitment, most of it. And since Ange has been in, we've spent over 1.1 billion on players. It just hasn't been spent well enough. We've failed better in the transfer market recently, though, I believe so, But we have spent money. Like you say, the wages is a different thing, but we have spent a lot of money.
Yeah. The figures which I'm looking at here, I've got most of these figures are from the accounts. The last couple of years, I'm relying on Transfer Market. It's the best of the rest. It's not the most accurate. Spurs have spent more than £100 million buying players on 7 years out of the last 8. So on a quantitative basis, that's competitive. In terms of the quality of the players bought, you're in a position to comment on that. I'm very fortunate. I work for the Professional Footballers Association as a teacher, so I teach professional footballers as students, Of Ben Davis, for example, he's been a student of mine. He's a magnificent young man, by the way. He's a really good guy, and when I'm in their company, when I'm sitting in the canteen and they're having conversations, I realise very, very quickly that I know nothing about football. It'll be exactly the same if you're sitting at a table with a bunch of doctors and you think you know a bit about medicine because you watch Holby City, you realise actually I know absolutely diddly squat.
Let's talk, because I know you're on a schedule, and there's some stuff I just want to cover before we finish. If it's not Enoch, and there's talk that the Joe Lewis family will sell their, call it 70% to 30% for Levy, who and what would be in it for them?
There are an awful lot of American billionaires who have been very successful in recent years. The American economy has grown 50% faster than that of Europe over the course of the last 10 to 12 years. So there's a lot of rich Americans around. Compared to buying an NFL franchise, buying Spurs for, let's say, £3 billion, which is what, $3.6 billion, is dead cheap. And for that, you get access to a sport which has a global appeal. NFL doesn't, NBA doesn't. You get prime real estate in London. Americans love London. So you get a club with a history and a heritage, which is fantastic. Although from your point of view, the history goes back far too long in terms of in terms of physically winning success, physically winning trophies. So I think it would be attractive to American investor. They want London clubs. They want English clubs in particular if they're going to invest in Europe. They want Premier League. I teach in New York every summer. I'm amazed at the number of people that come up to me and start talking about Ted Lasso, which is a Brighton fan. We're not exactly keen on Crystal Palace. That's where Ted Lasso takes place. Oh yeah, I want to go to Selhurst Park to see where Ted Lasso plays. But for them, it's real. The success of Welcome to Wrexham, and here I'm going to do my one bit of name dropping. Ryan Reynolds follows me on Twitter, which I find bizarre.
I follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, and he's almost as famous as you are. So
go on. I mean, there's always the fear with Daniel Levy. Alec Ferguson said, negotiating him over the quote of over his over Berbatov, that it was more painful than my hip operation. There's always stories. Chairman, for obvious reasons, don't want to deal with him. When he's buying, he wants to pay the absolute minimum. When he's selling, he wants to get the absolute maximum. I mean, my old financial director says when you negotiate a deal, you always leave a little bit left for the other man to come in. You've probably heard that as an accountant yourself. And yet with Levy, it's take everything out and then the last drop of blood from the stone. So what's a realistic valuation of Tottenham?
Well, I would say a realistic valuation is somewhere in the region of 3 billion.
3 billion.
You've not 3 billion. Yeah, you've not got to pay for infrastructure. All of that investment has taken place. Whereas in the case of Chelsea, they paid 2.5 billion, but they've got a 40,000 capacity stadium, which was designed for the last century.
Yeah.
So I think Spurs has that 500 to 1 billion premium over the Chelsea price. Chelsea was also a distressed asset. Spurs is not a distressed asset. My concern for anybody trying to buy is exactly the same as yours. I know people involved in net stadium naming rights. That deal should have been signed off by now, but it's not been.
Well, it's Paul Barber, isn't it? That's your big man at Brighton who works for Levy. I maybe shouldn't ask you anything about that because you won't be able to tell me. But Yeah, I mean, naming rights is something else. I mean, you think about that. Naming rights, we're now 6 years into, almost 6 years since the stadium opened. Even at 20 million a year, that's 120 million pound that's gone forever. It's Amanda Staveley and the Qataris.
Yeah, there's certainly interest in the Middle East in English football. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, it's maybe a question for Spurs supporters, and that some might not be particularly keen on Qataris as shielders and finances of Hamas, with the club, having a fairly, large Jewish support base.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but you've got no insider knowledge of who might come in and over what time scale.
No.
It's an attractive event.
It's attractive. At the end of the day, I am just a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. This last question from me, anyway. I don't know if anyone in the chat's got anything quick that I haven't covered, because I do say I said I'd try and run it to just around an hour, and we're a little bit over. Football regulator. Are you in favour of a football regulator? And what do you see him or her doing?
Do I want a football regulator? No. We should have a football association which was able to regulate the professional game. The FA has completely walked away from its responsibilities and has created the car crash that we currently have. You've got clubs in the Premier League litigating against the Premier League. You've got the Premier League effectively litigating against its own shareholders. You've got the Premier League and the EFL having a fallout. So we've got 6 clubs in the Premier League that wanted to form Super League. You've got Project Big Picture, which involved clubs in the Premier League resigning from the Premier League and signing up with the EFL if they didn't get their way. It's absolutely awful. If we had a strong football association, then they would be able to show leadership. We'd be able to have a rule book which was consistent and understandable, but we haven't. The Football Association has completely failed in its responsibilities towards the broader game. It effectively, when the Premier League was set up, it just walked away. It says, "Oh yeah, we like the fact that it's called the Football Association Premier League, but we're not prepared to get involved. We're not prepared to stand up for fans. We're not prepared to put our foot down when they're going to try to attempt Super League, when they're going to, and the prospect of matches taking place overseas, I think it's receded, but receded is my hair's receded, but unlike my hair, it might come back. And that's my concern. So I think my position on the regulator is that I think we need it rather than want it, and we need it to protect the game from owners who cannot be trusted.
Yeah, I mean, my take on that is yes, because we know from experience of institutions, all sorts of different non-football related institutions in the past, that self-regulated, and years later, scandals emerge left, right, and centre, don't they? And this is the thing about self-regulation. I mean, I'm all for it. I know it's gone through the first 2 readings in the committee stage in the House of Lords, the bill for the regulator. It's got 2 more stages to go. Then it'll go to the Houses of Parliament across the road. It's going to pass. It's good because all those in the, I mean, they probably know a lot more about the ins and outs of going on in the Football League and the corruption there within. So at the moment, I don't see an argument. Like if it was a clean house, like you said, we wouldn't need one. I think this is fans are, well, they don't like, they don't like clubs unless you're a Man City fan or a Chelsea fan. They don't like clubs like that, and we know strokes have been pulled. All right, we see how this all comes out on the watch. But that's my reason for actually wanting the regulator, because I just don't trust the Football League. I mean, they can't. Rick Parry and his cohorts, I mean, like I said, they couldn't run a bath, let alone a league. They've spent millions of what is our money, which is generated from us, on legal cases because they couldn't even get their rule book in. I mean, don't they know where the top lawyers are to put all these things in place, Or did they go on the cheap, do a Levy and do it on the cheap? You know what I mean?
Got somebody on Fiverr to do it.
Yeah.
Blaine is one of our well-known streamers and people. I think he's Irish, isn't he?
Yeah.
So Irish, a bit of Irish blood like you. I'm not Levy in or out, but I find this interesting. Presumably, what we're talking about. Yes, 24 years of ENIC, only one trophy, but we forget in 18 years from 84 to 2001, we only won 2 trophies, which was one League Cup and one FA Cup. Are we expecting too much as fans? Got a comment on that, Kieran?
You've got this. You've had before ENIC, you had the 6th highest budget. After ENIC, you've got the 6th highest budget. Without the move to the new stadium, I would say at most you could hope is getting a good run in the cup and on the back of that. I think Spurs have the infrastructure to make progress. Then it comes down to culture. I'm not sure the club's culture is correct.
Oh no,
because and we often say in business, culture beats strategy every time. And on the back of that, we could be having a conversation in 3 months, and you've got a European trophy under your belt.
Yeah.
So let's not be doom and gloom. I think the issue, if I was a Spurs fan, is that you've lost hope. And that for a club of Spurs stature and history and heritage, is probably the most depressing thing. As a Brighton fan, getting into Europe is the highlight of our ambitions, and we've achieved that. If we get that another couple of times, that'll be, in my lifetime, that would be great, but no more than that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's another show to talk about culture and mentality, where that comes from, and that's probably not Daniel's strength. Whatever his strengths are, I don't think that's it. Kieran, I know you've got other things to do. I said I'd try and keep it around the hour mark, which I think we've done. I can only say thank you so much for
big up,
for
Kieran.
joining us.
I
found it really interesting. For a boring academic and teacher, you've got an awful lot of interesting things to comment on. And it's been, as I say, next time we'll have you on, we'll talk about the Manchester music scene. But thank you. Thanks for everybody in the chat that's contributed. We are back on Friday night, Adrian.
Yeah, Friday is the 10 o'clock one to
10 p.m. show. It's like after my bedtime.
Yeah, for our USA and Canadian viewers.
Yeah, Kieran, we'll just say cheerio in the background. I'm going to put the stream off. But thanks everybody. I'm not going to play out with any music, and then we'll just say our cheerios. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to chat, guys.